Wawaki and the ESTARS went silent. The crystalline cities of Meridia glittered like diamonds scattered across an azure landscape. For millennia, the Meridians had built their civilization on harmony, diplomacy, and the pursuit of knowledge. Their slender, iridescent forms moved with grace through towering spires of transparent material that caught the light of their twin suns and scattered it in breathtaking rainbows. They were not warriors. They had never needed to be. Until today. The first ships appeared as dark smudges against the pristine sky, growing larger by the second. Alarm signals echoed through the crystalline structures, a sound that hadn't been heard in generations. In the grand communication spire, Elder Lysara's translucent fingers trembled as she activated the emergency broadcast system. "This is Meridia sending an urgent plea to all allied worlds," she spoke, her melodic voice cracking with fear. "Unidentified vessels have entered our atmosphere. They are not responding to diplomatic channels. We request immediate assistance. We have no defenses. I repeat, we have no defenses." The message shot outward, carried on quantum particles to the far reaches of the galaxy. Lysara closed her multifaceted eyes, a prayer forming in her mind. Someone must hear them. Someone must come. The ships descended, their hulls black as the void between stars, covered in patterns of blood-red sigils. As they broke through the lower atmosphere, the temperature around them warped, creating ripples of heat that distorted the air. The Meridians watched in horror as the first energy blast struck their grand archive, shattering millennia of knowledge into dust. The invaders called themselves the Vector. Six-limbed beings with exoskeletons that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their voices rasped like stone against metal when they spoke, demanding immediate surrender, complete subjugation, and access to all Meridian resources. "You have one planetary rotation to comply." The Vector commander's voice boomed through their communication systems. "Resistance is illogical. You have no allies who will risk confronting the Vector dominion." Lysara stood among the Council of Elders, their slender forms huddled together in the emergency chamber. "We must send another message," she insisted. "Surely someone will answer." Elder Tyvos, his skin faded with age to a pale blue, shook his head sadly. "The Vectars speak truth, Lysara. The Galactic Alliance will not risk confrontation for our small world. The Dryadi Confederation is too far. The Zentari are bound by their non-interference pact." He hesitated, then added softly, "And the humans, they are still recovering from their own conflicts. They will not come." "Then we are lost," whispered another elder. Lysara turned away, refusing to accept their fate. "I will send the message anyway. Until the last moment, I will hope." On the edges of the Sol system, listening post Epsilon 7 drifted silently, a small outpost manned by a skeleton crew of 4. The station's primary function was to monitor deep space communications, particularly from the sectors beyond human expansion. Most days were quiet, filled with routine checks and the occasional burst of alien trade negotiations or cultural broadcasts. Communications specialist Rohan Sharma was on solemn night shift when the alert pinged. A distress signal, fragmented by distance and interference, but unmistakable in its urgency. He straightened in his chair, adjusting the parameters to clean up the transmission. The melodic voice of an alien being filled the small monitoring room. "Urgent plea. Vessels. Not responding to diplomatic channels. Request immediate assistance. No defenses." Rohan's fingers flew across the interface, enhancing and clarifying. The signal was coming from the Meridian system, nearly 17 light-years from Earth. He frowned. The Meridians were known to humanity, though contact had been limited, a peaceful species with advanced mathematical and artistic achievements, but little military significance. Protocol dictated that he log the signal and forward it to Earth Command, but something in the alien's voice made him hesitate. The fear was palpable, transcending species differences. Before entering the standard report, he added a personal note. recommend NMEDAREVIUBO and RESPONSA. Then he did something technically against regulations. He sent the raw transmission directly to Admiral Helena Okoa, his former commanding officer, and someone he knew would take it seriously. 6 hours later, his communications panel lit up with an incoming transmission, coded at the highest security level. Admiral Okoa's weathered face appeared on the screen. "Specialist Sharma," she said without preamble, "your transmission has been received and verified. The United Earth Council is convening an emergency session to discuss intervention options." Rohan blinked in surprise. "Intervention, Mom. For the Meridians? We've identified the aggressors as the Vector Dominion." Her expression hardened. "They've been expanding aggressively for the past decade. Intelligence suggests they're testing galactic response by targeting isolated, non-militarized worlds. But the Meridians aren't formally allied with Earth," Rowan pointed out. "The Council rarely approves military action without political necessity." The Admiral's mouth twitched. "Sometimes, Specialist, we act not because it's politically expedient, but because it's right. The Council will deliberate, but I can tell you this, ships are already being prepared." After the transmission ended, Rowan sat in silence, absorbing what had just happened. Earth, still recovering from its own devastating conflicts, was considering intervention for a species they barely knew. The implications were enormous. The United Earth Council chamber in Geneva was rarely filled to capacity these days. After the Unification Wars and the subsequent Martian Rebellion, many seats remained symbolically empty, representing populations still rebuilding, still healing. Today, however, every available council member was present, either physically or via secure holographic projection. Admiral Okoa stood at the center of the chamber, her uniform pristine, her posture rigid despite her 70 years of age. Behind her, a holographic projection showed the Meridian system and the advancing Vector fleet. "The Vector Dominion has given the Meridians 24 hours to surrender," she explained. "Based on previous patterns, surrender will not save civilian lives. The Vector Strip conquered worlds of resources, reducing native populations to labor forces at best, extinction at worst. And you propose we intervene?" asked Councillor Mbeki, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "Earth is still rebuilding. Our military forces are stretched thin maintaining peace within our own systems. I'm not proposing we deploy our regular forces," Admiral Okoa replied. "I'm proposing Operation Thunderbolt." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Operation Thunderbolt was controversial. A rapid response unit comprised of veteran soldiers, many of whom had fought on opposing sides during the Unification Wars. They operated older vessels, retrofitted with experimental technology, and employed unconventional tactics that sometimes skirted the edges of interstellar law. "They're not diplomats," Councillor Lai pointed out. "Sending them could be seen as an act of war against the Vector." "The Vector have already committed an act of war against a peaceful civilization," Admiral Okoa countered. "They don't respond to diplomacy. Intelligence suggests they respect only strength, and are testing to see which powers will stand against their expansion." "And if we don't stand?" asked Councillor Alvarez softly. The Admiral's expression remained impassive, but her eyes showed her conviction. "Then we send a message to every predatory power in the galaxy that peaceful worlds are easy targets, that Earth will not defend those who cannot defend themselves." The debate continued for hours, arguments flying back and forth across the chamber. The political implications were complex, the military risks substantial. Earth had only recently found stability after decades of internal conflict. Finally, Council President Takahashi rose from her seat. The chamber fell silent. "We have heard all perspectives," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Now we must decide what kind of civilization humanity wishes to be in this galaxy. One that turns away when the innocent call for help, or one that stands against tyranny, even at great cost." She looked around the chamber, meeting each councillor's gaze. "I call for a vote. on the motion to authorize Operation Thunderbolt to render assistance to the Meridian civilization against vector aggression. When the votes were tallied, the decision was made by the narrowest of margins. Earth would intervene. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden within a hollowed-out rock formation officially listed as Mining Operation MX-117, a fleet of ships waited. Unlike the sleek, uniform vessels of Earth's official navy, these ships were a motley collection, some salvaged from battles, others cobbled together from various technologies. They were ugly by conventional standards, scared and patched, but every crew member knew their worth wasn't in aesthetics but in capability. Colonel Maya Chen strode through the docking bay of the flagship, the UES Defiant. At 45, she was younger than many of her subordinates, but commanded absolute respect. The scars on her face and the cybernetic right arm told part of her story. The rest was written in classified files and in the nightmares that still woke her in cold sweats. "Attention," Captain Darius Wade called as she approached the assembled officers. "At ease," Chen said immediately, gesturing for them to gather around. "We've got orders. Operation Thunderbolt has been greenlit." A ripple of surprise passed through the group. Operation Thunderbolt had been designed as a theoretical exercise, a contingency plan that most believed would never receive council approval. "Target?" asked Major Alexei Volkov, his Russian accent thicker than usual with excitement. "The Meridian system," Chen replied, activating a holographic display. "Peaceful species, non-militarized. They're being invaded by the Vector Dominion." "The Vector?" Lieutenant Commander Amara Okafor frowned. "They'd got a fleet 3 times the size of ours, with technology at least on par with standard Earth military." Chen's smile was sharp. "Which is why they're sending us, not the regular Navy. We don't fight fair." "Timeline?" Wade asked. "The Meridians have less than 18 hours before the Vector ultimatum expires. We'll use the experimental fold drive to cut travel time. Engineers estimate arrival in 14 hours. Several officers exchanged worried glances. The fold drive was notorious for its strain on both ships and crew. "I know what you're thinking," Chen said. "Yes, it's risky. Yes, it's experimental. And yes, we're probably going to arrive in a hot zone against superior numbers." She looked around at their faces, scared, weathered, determined. "But you all signed up for this unit knowing the odds. We're the ones who go where others can't or won't. We're the line in the sand." She straightened, her cybernetic arm whirring softly with the movement. "Prep your teams. Full combat readiness. We launch in 30 minutes. As the officers dispersed, Captain Wade remained behind. "Something on your mind, Captain?" Chen asked. "Just curious, Colonel. Why the Meridians? They're not strategically valuable to Earth. They're not even formal allies." Chen was silent for a moment, her gaze distant. "You remember Callisto?" Wade stiffened. Everyone remembered the Callisto massacre during the Unification Wars. Thousands of civilians had died when separatist forces bombarded the Jovian moon's habitat domes. It had been one of the turning points of the war, galvanizing public opinion against the separatists. "I was there," Chen continued quietly. "Not as a soldier. As a civilian, my family was visiting relatives. I watched my parents and sister die when the dome collapsed." She met Wade's eyes. "No one came for us for 3 days. 3 days of watching people suffocate, freeze, or die from radiation exposure." She picked up her tactical tablet, checking the mission parameters one last time. "So when someone asks for help, and we can give it, we do. That's the difference between us and them." Wade nodded slowly, understanding. "I'll have the ship ready in 20. The journey through fold space was brutal. The experimental drive compressed normal spacetime, creating a temporary fold that the ships could traverse, cutting travel time exponentially. But the process was far from smooth. Gravity fluctuated wildly. Structural integrity alarms screamed constantly, and every crew member endured waves of nausea and disorientation. Colonel Chen, strapped into the command chair on the Defiance bridge, monitored the fleet's status through gritted teeth. 2 of the smaller vessels had been forced to drop out of fold space due to drive instability, but the remaining 5 ships, including the 3 largest, maintained formation. "Approaching Meridian space," reported the navigation officer, her voice strained. "Fold collapse in 3, 2, 1. Reality seemed to stretch and then snap back into place. The view screen cleared, revealing the azure world of Meridia ahead. And surrounding it, a fleet of Vectar warships, their hulls gleaming with malevolent purpose. "Tactical assessment," Chen ordered, pushing aside the lingering effects of fold space. 17 Vector vessels detected, reported Lieutenant Commander Okafor from the tactical station. "They've established orbital positions around Meridia. Energy readings suggest they're preparing for a full-scale planetary assault. Any response to our arrival?" "They're reconfiguring formation. Looks like they're designating 3 capital ships to intercept us while the rest maintain position." Chen nodded grimly. "They're not taking us seriously." "Good." She opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Colonel Chen. We have a saying on Earth. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. Let's show these Vector just how much fight humans can bring. Initiate Operation Thunderbolt." Phase 1. The human fleet accelerated toward Meridia, their engines blazing against the void. The Vector interceptors moved to engage, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. They weren't prepared for what happened next. The human ships didn't form a traditional battle line. Instead, they scattered, each vessel taking an unpredictable vector, seemingly random yet precisely coordinated. Before the Vector could adjust their approach, the human vessels unleashed a barrage of small objects. Hundreds of them, dispersing in all directions. "Proximity mines deployed," Okafor confirmed. "Stealth systems active." The leading Vectar warship, a massive dreadnought with pulsating red sigils along its hull, continued its advance, scanning for the conventional threat of torpedoes or energy weapons. The mines, designed to be nearly invisible to standard detection systems, drifted into the path of the Vectar fleet. On the Defiance bridge, Colonel Chen watched the tactical display, her expression grim but determined. "Now we find out if Earth's pariahs and cast-offs can save a world." She tapped her command console. "All ships, execute attack pattern Delta. Let's bring some thunder." As the first Vectar ship triggered the proximity mines, a cascade of explosions illuminated the darkness of space, signaling the beginning of humanity's first intervention in a war not their own. Against all odds, Earth had answered the call that no one else would. And the galaxy would never be the same. The storm killed humanity. The void erupted with light as the proximity mines detonated, engulfing the lead Vector vessel in a series of explosions. For a moment, the massive warship seemed untouched, its shields absorbing the initial blasts. Then fissures appeared along its port side, venting atmosphere and debris into space. On the Defiance bridge, Colonel Chen leaned forward. "Status report. Vectar flagship shields at 60%, Lieutenant Commander Okafor reported. They're recovering faster than anticipated." Chen nodded grimly. "As expected, all ships, execute attack pattern Epsilon. Target their sensor arrays and propulsion systems." The human fleet moved with coordinated precision that belied their mismatched appearance. The UES Defiant and the heavy cruiser Thunderchild accelerated toward the damaged Vectar flagship, while the smaller vessels Harpy, Javelin, and Stormcrow dispersed to engage the other Vectar interceptors. From the Vectar perspective, the human tactics appeared chaotic, even suicidal. The Earth vessels didn't maintain formation or follow standard engagement protocols. They darted in and out of weapons range, striking unpredictably, sometimes seeming to retreat only to circle back for another assault. On the Vectar command ship, War Commander Thoric gripped the edges of his tactical console, his exoskeleton clicking with agitation. Identity confirmed, his intelligence officer reported. Earth vessels. Human military. Humans. Thorek's compound eyes narrowed. The divided species. The ones who fight among themselves. The same war commander. They've never intervened in conflicts beyond their own system before. Thorak studied the tactical display, watching as the human ships executed another series of seemingly random maneuvers. Why do they fight this way? There is no logic to their formation. Before his officer could respond, the ship shuddered violently as targeted weapons fire from the Defiant struck their starboard sensor array. They're targeting our sensors, the tactical officer realized. Not our weapons or shields. Predictable, Thorek dismissed. Without sensors, we cannot target effectively. A standard tactic. But the humans weren't following standard tactics, as the vector ships compensated for the sensor damage by linking their networks, creating a shared targeting grid. The Earth vessels suddenly changed strategy. The smaller ships peeled away while the Defiant and Thunderchild launched what appeared to be conventional torpedoes. The vector defense systems easily tracked the incoming projectiles, preparing to intercept them, until the torpedoes abruptly split apart mid-flight, releasing clouds of metallic particles that expanded rapidly, enveloping sections of space in glittering mists. What is this? Thorek demanded as the tactical displays began to flicker and distort. Chaff, his officer replied, confusion evident in his rasping voice. Primitive radar jamming technology. But our systems use quantum targeting, not radar. This shouldn't affect. His words cut off as all tactical displays went black. The chaff wasn't just metallic particles. It contained billions of nanobots programmed to emit signals that disrupted the very quantum entanglement the vector systems relied upon. Restore targeting, Thorek commanded. Unable to comply, the officer replied, frantically working at his console. The disruption is preventing quantum synchronization. Manual targeting only. Manual targeting was something the vector rarely practiced. Their technology had made it nearly obsolete. As they struggled to adapt, the human vessels struck again, this time focusing their fire on the vector engines with devastating precision. On Myredia's surface, Elder Lysara and the Council watched the space battle unfold through their observatory instruments. The crystalline structures of their viewing chamber refracted the distant explosions into rainbow patterns across the walls. Who are they? Elder Tygos asked, his voice hushed with awe. Who would challenge the vector for our sake? The ship's bare Earth markings, Lysara replied, her multifaceted eyes wide. Humans have come. Impossible, another elder murmured. The humans are still recovering from their internal wars. They have no stake in our survival. Lysara turned her gaze from the sky to her fellow council members. Then why are they here? Why do they fight when all others turned away? No one had an answer, but all eyes returned to the battle above, where against all odds, the human fleet was holding its own against the superior vector forces. Harpy's been hit, Captain Wade reported on the Defiance bridge. They've lost propulsion and life support is failing. Colonel Chen's expression didn't change, but her grip on the armrests tightened. Order evacuation to emergency pods. Thunderchild to retrieve. Continue the attack pattern. The bridge crew exchanged glances. They'd expected casualties, but the reality was still sobering. The Vector flagship is repositioning, Okafor reported. They're attempting to clear the chaff field. Chen studied the tactical display. The Vector had numbers and firepower on their side, but their rigid command structure was proving to be a weakness. They weren't adapting quickly enough to the humans' unconventional tactics. New contact. The sensor officer suddenly called out. Small craft launching from Myredia's surface. Myredian vessels. Chen asked, surprised. Negative. Configuration unknown. But, Colonel, they're broadcasting an Earth military identification code. An old one. Chen frowned, then understanding dawned. Get me a visual. The view screen shifted to show a small squadron of fighters rising from the azure planet below. They were Earth-made Raptor-class interceptors, a design that had been retired from active service nearly a decade ago. But these had been modified, their hulls bearing unfamiliar patterns of blue and silver. A transmission came through, crackling with interference. UES Defiant, this is Captain Elara Rhodes of the Earth Expeditionary Force. Looks like you could use some backup. Chen's eyebrows rose. Captain Rhodes, there is no Earth Expeditionary Force on Meridia. A laugh came through the comm. Not officially, no. Let's just say some of us retired here after the Unification Wars. We've been helping the Meridians develop some basic defenses, just in case. Good thing, too. As she spoke, the squadron of fighters executed a perfect formation maneuver, diving toward the Vector vessels from below, hitting them at their least protected angle. Chen couldn't help but smile. Welcome to the fight, Captain Rhodes. Let's coordinate our efforts. With the addition of Rhodes' squadron, the battle dynamics shifted. The fighters were small and agile, difficult for the larger Vector ships to target. They darted between the massive warships, striking at vulnerable points before retreating, drawing Vector fire away from the Earth fleet. On the Vector flagship, War Commander Thorak watched with growing frustration as his forces struggled to adapt. They fight without honor, he hissed, without proper formation, like vermin. Effective vermin. His tactical officer dared to point out. We've lost 2 vessels, and 3 more are reporting critical damage. Thorak's anger boiled over. Enough of this. Prepare the planetary bombardment. We will show these humans what happens when they interfere with the Vector Dominion. The order sent ripples of alarm through the Earth fleet as they detected the Vector warships repositioning, their main weapons now oriented toward Meridia's surface. They're going to bombard the planet, Okafor reported, horror evident in her voice. Colonel Chen's expression hardened. Not while we're here. All ships, initiate Operation Thunderbolt. Phase 2. Captain Wade looked up sharply. Colonel, Phase 2 hasn't been field tested. The risk to our ships is acceptable. Chen cut him off. Transmit the activation codes. Now, throughout the Earth fleet, officers received and executed the new orders. On the exterior of each vessel, panels slid open, revealing devices that had been kept classified even from most of the crew. Graviton pulse generators, experimental technology designed to manipulate localized gravity fields. As the devices activated, space itself seemed to distort around the Vector fleet. Ships that had been moving into bombardment position suddenly found themselves drifting off course, pulled by invisible forces that their navigational systems couldn't compensate for. Graviton field stable, the science officer reported. Vector vessels experiencing localized gravity distortions of up to 3.7 G. The stress on the Earth ships was immediate and severe. Warning alarms blared across the bridge as the Defiant's structural integrity began to fail under the strain of generating the graviton field. Hull breach on Deck 7. Wade reported. Emergency bulkheads activated. Chen nodded grimly. Hold the field. Target the Vector flagship's weapon systems. All available power. The Defiant's main batteries fired, the energy beams distorted and amplified by the graviton field. They struck the Vector flagship with devastating force, tearing through its weakened shields and ripping apart its forward weapons array in a spectacular explosion. Across the battlefield, the other Earth vessels executed similar attacks, coordinating their efforts to cripple the Vector fleet's offensive capabilities. Captain Rhodes' fighters darted through the chaos, exploiting the confusion to deliver precision strikes against vulnerable systems. On the Vector flagship, systems were failing catastrophically. War Commander Thorak clung to his command chair as the ship shuddered around him. How? He demanded, green ichor seeping from a wound on his carapace. How are they doing this? His officers had no answers. The human tactics defied Vector military doctrine. They weren't just fighting. They were rewriting the rules of engagement with every maneuver. War Commander, his communications officer called. We're receiving transmissions from the other vessels. They're requesting permission to withdraw. Thoric's compound eyes flashed with rage. Withdraw? The Vector Dominion does not retreat. Sir, his second-in-command spoke carefully. We've lost 5 ships. 7 more are critically damaged. Our flagship weapons are offline. The humans have technologies we did not anticipate. Thoric wanted to refuse, to order his fleet to fight to the last ship. But even he could not deny the reality before him. What had begun as a simple subjugation of a defenseless world had become a costly engagement against an enemy they had gravely underestimated. Send the signal, he finally rasped. Tactical withdrawal. All vessels. On the Defiance bridge, the crew watched in disbelief as the Vector ships began to disengage, their engines flaring as they pulled away from Meridia's orbit. They're retreating. Okafor confirmed, her voice tinged with wonder. All Vector vessels are breaking orbit. A ragged cheer went up across the bridge, quickly tempered by the reality of their situation. The Earth fleet had suffered severe damage. The Harpy was lost, its crew evacuated to emergency pods. The Defiant and Thunderchild had sustained critical damage from the graviton field generation. Only the smaller vessels Javelin and Stormcrow remained fully operational. Casualties? Chen asked quietly. 27 confirmed, Wade replied somberly. 42 injured, some critical. Chen closed her eyes briefly, acknowledging the sacrifice. Signal Captain Rhodes. Request assistance with rescue operations. And wounded. As the adrenaline of battle faded, the weight of what they had accomplished began to sink in. Against overwhelming odds, they had defended a world that wasn't their own, against an enemy that had never before been defeated. Colonel, the communications officer called. We're receiving a transmission from the Meridian surface. Elder Lizara requests to speak with the Earth Commander. Chen straightened in her chair, wincing slightly from a wound she hadn't noticed during the heat of battle. Put her through. The view screen shifted to show Elder Lizara, her translucent form seeming to glow with internal light. Behind her, other Meridians gathered, their expressions filled with what Chen recognized as awe, despite their alien features. Commander of Earth, Lizara began, her melodic voice carrying across space. We have no words sufficient to express our gratitude. When we sent our plea to the stars, we did not truly believe anyone would answer. Chen nodded respectfully. Elder Lizara, I am Colonel Maya Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We received your distress call and came as quickly as we could. But why? Another Meridian elder asked, stepping into view. We are not allies. We have no treaties, no shared resources of value. Chen considered her answer carefully. The truth was complex. Political calculations, strategic assessments, personal convictions all factoring into Earth's decision. But in the end, it came down to something simpler. Because it was right, she replied simply. Because no peaceful civilization should face extinction while others stand by. Because humanity remembers what it means to be alone against overwhelming force. Lizara's multifaceted eyes seemed to shimmer with emotion. The Vector will return. They do not forgive defeat. Then Earth will stand with Meridia again, Chen promised. And next time, you won't be defenseless. In the days that followed, rescue operations gave way to recovery efforts. Earth medical teams worked alongside Meridian healers to treat the wounded from both species. Engineers assessed the damage to the fleet and began temporary repairs. Captain Ilara Rhodes and her squadron, it turned out, were veterans of the Unification Wars who had chosen exile on Meridia rather than return to an Earth still healing from conflict. For years, they had quietly integrated into Meridian society, sharing knowledge while respecting the Meridians' peaceful nature. We never pushed them to militarize, Rhodes explained to Chen as they walked through a crystalline garden that had miraculously survived the Vector attack. But we did suggest some basic defensive measures, early warning systems, planetary shields. Not enough, as it turned out. It bought time, Chen pointed out. Without that warning, we would have arrived too late. Rhodes nodded, her weathered face solemn. What happens now? The UEC isn't exactly known for its interventionist policies. Chen smiled slightly. Things change. This operation has shown that Earth can project power beyond our system when necessary. The Council is already discussing formal alliance options with the Meridians, defensive pacts, technology exchanges, cultural missions, and the Vector. Intelligence suggests they're regrouping, but they've pulled back from this sector entirely. They didn't expect resistance, and they certainly didn't expect Earth to get involved. Chen's expression hardened. They'll think twice before targeting peaceful worlds again. As she spoke, a group of young Meridians approached, their slender forms moving with the characteristic grace of their species. One carried a crystal formation that seemed to glow from within. Colonel Chen, the leader of the group, said hesitantly, "We wish to present you with this token of our gratitude. It is a memory crystal, containing the songs and stories of our people." Chen accepted the gift carefully, feeling its surprising warmth against her palm. "Thank you. I will ensure it reaches Earth, so that our people can learn more about yours." The young Meridian hesitated, then asked. "The others said no one would come. That we were too distant, too unimportant. Yet humans crossed the void for us. Why do you fight for others when no one else will?" Chen looked at the crystal in her hand, thinking of Earth's long, bloody history, of countless wars and conflicts, of humanity's capacity for both terrible destruction and remarkable compassion. "Because we know what it means to stand alone," she said finally. "Throughout our history, we've fought our own battles, sometimes against impossible odds. We've learned that victory doesn't always go to the largest force or the most advanced technology. It goes to those with the will to fight, to endure, to sacrifice for what they believe in." She looked up at the Meridian youth. "And we've learned that no civilization should have to stand alone if others can help. That's the kind of galaxy we want to live in, one where the strong protect the peaceful, where calls for help are answered." The Meridian seemed to absorb her words, the iridescent patterns on its skin shifting thoughtfully. "Then we are fortunate that it was humanity who heard our call." As Chen made her way back to the temporary Earth,